Great. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to be joined by Phil Belamant, who's the founder and CEO of Zilch, no less Europe's fastest double unicorn. Phil is a serial entrepreneur. You're also chair, Phil, of the Uniform Council for UK Fintech. Sorry, Unicorn Council for UK Fintech. Uniform. We're in uniform today. But Phil, it's great to be here. I know time is brief, so what we really want to hear about is Zilch and how you've got to 4 million customers in the UK and how you're transforming credit. And I know it's not your first social enterprise, so perhaps you'd like to elaborate a little bit about the company and how you've gone on this journey and accelerated so quickly to this point in time.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, not a problem at all. Let me kick off. I'll put that into 3 minutes. So basically what we do, we're in consumer credit. One of the problems that we found when we looked at the market is that consumers are spending a huge amount of money every year on fees and interest. So if you look across the UK and the US, this is tallying now about $150 billion a year. So that's $150 billion every single year customers are spending on fees and interest when they take out credit. This is not for the products they're buying. This is just the fees and interest charges. So if you reduce that down to daily, every single day you're talking about $400 million is going to lenders, credit card companies in fees and interest. And so this felt like a really large problem that needed fixing. And so what we did at Zilch is we asked ourselves a question: what are people doing with the money? And it sounds like an obvious thing when you hear the answer. People spend this money. They buy something, right? People don't borrow money and put it in a bank account. People are actually spending. And so what we did is we said, how do you fix this problem if we know that customers are borrowing and then going to spend from sellers? How do you fix this? And so you look at the ecosystem. You have sellers that are paying billions in advertising to big tech companies, Google, Facebook, etc., to get in front of us all. We then scrolling through whichever app, we click that advert, and we pull out our credit card, and we pay quite literally billions in interest and fees to buy the products. This seems very inefficient. And so what Zilch does is it brings these two things together to transform the way we think about commerce. And what I mean by that is we use the ad budgets of brands to subsidize the cost of credit for consumers. So we turn ad budgets basically into free and affordable credit for the mass consumer market. So just very quickly what this means is, how does it work? A customer will use our products. We have 4 million customers here in the UK. We've done about 3 billion of sales so far today, 3,000 transactions per second at the moment. And what happens is a customer opens our app, they tell us what they're looking to buy, whether that's at a brand or, for instance, they're looking for trainers. We will then go through all of our partners and sell that demand to the market. So this is Facebook, Google, etc. And brands can bid on that demand in real time. For instance, if the customer says, I'm looking to buy trainers, what will happen is that Foot Locker can bid on that for 5% for the sale. We can see in real time Nike are willing to pay 8% for a sale, and so on and so forth. We then present that to the customer in a rank order of cost for credit, offset by that commission. In other words, you could pay over time at Nike for free. You could pay over time at Foot Locker for free. Oh, but by the way, JD Sports is for free, and you're going to get some cash back. The customer then goes on to transact, and effectively you have the advertising revenues of budgets going directly into sales, far cheaper than the budgets they're spending on big tech, and these customers being able to afford products with no interest and no fees of any kind. And that's effectively what we've built and what we've put together today.
And when you've got that volume that you've just described, Phil, and when you've got that level of transformation in the paradigm, the prism as to how people think about credit, there's a lot of trust required, and that begs the question about regulation. And we've heard from the regulators here this morning, we've heard from government. Tell us a little bit about the regulation of the sector. I know you've been quite a vocal, vociferous commentator on that, and why Zilch has really led the way in that regard with the FCA and others.
Yeah, I mean, we think about the UK, if you think about the regulator here, the FCA, the sandbox environment, a lot of people actually still don't even know about these things, which we find to be quite incredible given that the FCA has quite literally led the way in this regard and has now been copied. We were just having a conversation privately about this earlier. They've now been copied almost 100 times plus by other markets with the FCA sandbox. And so what happened is when we set the business up, we realized that we wanted to create a lending product for customers. It seemed obvious to us that this needed to be regulated. There are other providers in the market that do installment payments. So the Zilch product is you can spend anywhere you like. You can check out and pay 25% down, 25% every 2 weeks. You could do 25% every 3 months, or you could choose to pay everything on checkout and get immediate cash back. So the most rewarding way to pay. There are others in the market who do installment payments, and I'm sure a bunch of everyone in here knows some of these brands. A lot of these companies are unregulated today. And so, the way we see things is if you're creating a liability for the consumer, you need to be regulated and offer the consumer the protections they would expect. That's just the way we've seen this. And frankly, it's turned out to be quite a superpower for us. We really do champion regulation and compliance in the company, and we tell all of our team, think of this as a way to really beat the competition in the long term because you are providing this protection to consumers. And that's how we built the business from day one.
And Phil, if I can transition to another topic that I know requires a lot of focus in financial services and regulation, is artificial intelligence and how that's played a role in the Zilch story so far. If I think about the fintech universe we cover, and certainly the application to the banks, there's a lot on first-party data. There's a lot on the machine learning, the large language models that we've built. We see companies like LSEG who are also speaking here with the Microsoft investment and partnership with Azure. There's a huge amount going on. There's a lot of application in fraud. There's a lot of application in how it can remove frictionless processes and actually give a big advantage both to the incumbents and some of the disruptors. But it'd be really great to hear from you how AI is being put to work within Zilch and what your plans are for the business.
I think the way you ask that question is important. You say AI is being put to work. I think what we find in the industry at the moment is there's a lot of people speaking about AI. They have a slide deck about AI. There's really nothing happening inside the company with regard to AI. A lot of the implementation that you see from firms today, we really don't consider to be very technical. I mean, if you think about a lot of companies are using AI to solve problems today of toil. So you think about, I don't want to answer the chat. I don't want to reply to the email. We could therefore, perhaps cut our workforce on servicing by X many people. We're not sure that this is huge and massive innovation. In fact, it was my understanding that that was table stakes. You could write a bunch of if and else statements to respond to the appropriate questions. It's not very complex. What we're really thinking about with AI is, with Zilch, you've got 3 companies together in one. So you have a payments business, you have a lending company, and then you have an advertising business. And these companies are all happening at the same time. So what I mean by that is, when a customer opens our app and says that they would like to buy sneakers or they want to go to shop at JD Sports, what happens in real time is we have to underwrite that customer for that next transaction. What can they afford? We don't underwrite the customer for a line of credit and never underwrite them again like a credit card. We're doing this on every single transaction. So this has to happen in real time. We then feed all of that demand into the ecosystem and look for bids, programmatic bids on that demand. What are you willing to pay us to drive this customer to you? And we have to aggregate all of this data and feed it back to the customer in an understandable way to create the most value. And then, of course, when the customer swipes the card and transacts, we have to then measure the result of that and attribute the sales. So brands can actually load $1 on an ad campaign with us, and in real time, for the first time ever, they can attribute sales as the cards are being swiped virtually in their online stores or in stores physically. That has always been near impossible for brands to do this. And then match that to a profile of individual, et cetera, moving forward. And so what we're trying to do with AI is we're saying, if you have all of this utilization and data, how do you do something complex with AI? How do you combine all of this and start to get better at understanding who the customer is in real time and underwrite them for an amount of credit? But further than that, what is this customer intending to do before they do it?
Right.
How good can we get at guessing what you're about to do? We're all creatures of habit. If we look at what you do in your neighborhood to what you do around the office and thereafter, these are very similar things going on in your lives on an ongoing basis. And so if we can use AI to combine this data, and as you open the app, have a recommendation for what you're about to do, we can drive a lot of commerce and value for the sellers and at the same time create huge amounts of value back to the consumer. We think that is really very interesting. And this is something that no human could be tasked with solving. You need a computer or many of them to solve this problem.
No, it's great observations, Phil. I mean, we hosted our Fintech conference, our public company Fintech conference in New York 2 months ago, and it was very clear that investors need to understand how AI is being deployed. There was one very clear example from a founder CEO, much like yourself, and they've got 40 billion TPV going through annually through their systems and payments, and they were talking about the LTV CAC benefits. Yeah. And I know you, since you've set up Zilch with Sean, your focus has been on profitability and that pathway. So maybe taking what you've just said and applying that to how you think about the business, and you think about unit economics and how you think about profitability, and then we'll transition to the market. But a last word, please, on Zilch before we get there, because I know you've been invited to the AWS Summit next week to talk about it in your business as well, AI.
Yeah, great. So we have a big announcement next week, and we hope everyone just looks out for this on AI specifically at the summit. But when you look at the product, and the thing for us is you want to see utilization. So you see, we're in people's hands. The whole concept is if you're using the product for everything that you're doing, and when we look at open banking data, after just 3 or 4 months, we're almost at 60+% of customers' usage. So everything they're spending on a card in a month, they're using our product for after just around 3 or 4 months. And what you can do with that is you can get really predictive about it. So just coming to this point again, finally, how we want to drive this utilization by making sure we get in front of customers with real tangible value, not a 50% off of coffee at some place you never go to and don't ever want to go to. We want to be more meaningful than that. And then at the same time, when we're looking at how we drive the business, we drive the whole business and ladder every KPI up into the P&L. So we look at the whole P&L across the company, and then every KPI ladders into one of those components of the P&L. Now, what's interesting is we think about growth. We're always tracking cohorts of customers, how they're performing, what does retention look like, bad debt loss ratios, and that CAC versus that CAC payoff. So today as a company, we pay off CAC in just less than 6 months. Right, so what we want to see is that same curve, but we don't want to get this curve out of whack. So we don't want to just solve for bad debt. Yeah. We want to solve for this LTV over CAC ratio. Yeah. And so we can start to use more predictive analytics to say, where is a cohort? How is it tracking on month 1 utilization, month 2 utilization, retention, bad debt, and where's that trending? And ultimately, instead of a team of our business analysts sitting and saying, product managers going, we better tweak this, let's go and look at a CRM campaign here, the system itself can start to actually say, let's incentivize this cohort with a deal over here, let's go and reinvest in this cohort over there to convert them better. And all of this can ladder into the P&L, ultimately automatically.
Yeah. Well, Phil, with what you've built and with the profile of the company, it's inevitable that there's been interest in where you're ultimately going to take the business and whether you're going to go public. And with that, maybe just a view, and I'll express a perspective, and perhaps from you as well, on the state of the market and where you want to take the business. But certainly, on an IPO market basis, we've seen a sort of measured return to conditions. Obviously, there's a lot of anxiety and sensitivity given what's been happening over the last 48 hours in the Middle East. But what I will say is the US tends to always lead us out of the cycles, and these are cycles. We see key lessons: attractive financial profiles, clearly identifiable peers, a very clear, notable position within a sizable TAM, addressable market, and a conservative capital structure. Those tend to be the criteria set that we see working for companies. There's always a debate about UK and Europe. We saw Birkenstock list into the US. And I think there's a lot of sensitivity around the elections this year, as well as the listing rule changes in London. But we are seeing some encouraging signs. We're seeing the S&P up 10%. We're seeing the Fintech index up 9%. And back to where we were earlier in the conversation around AI, if you look at NVIDIA's performance with 82% improvement, it's driven by the Magnificent Seven. Anything with an AI at the core, look forward to the announcement next week, is going to really resonate with investors. But Phil, your view on your thoughts on the market. You saw the banks produce their earnings results last week. Yeah. Massive uplift from the big US banks in terms of equity earnings, equity capital markets. A word or two on the future of the company and your thoughts on the markets.
Mark, we've always said publicly and continue to say the aspiration is to list the company our business is very capital efficient, but it requires a complex mix of capital. So you've got, equity, we've got debt to fund receivables, at the same time working capital to accommodate the loan-to-value ratio of that debt, and so on and so forth. So we think that, we always had conversations with banks 4 years ago, and the idea was you don't have to go public anymore. Private markets are booming, family offices are growing to compete with VC. The next check will always be there. And our question was, but what if it's not? And the answer was no, but it will be, right? And Tiger Global is writing 200 million checks and so on, and it's gone. Yep. Right? So our view is if we want to keep growing and driving this business, we think it needs to be a public company. We can create a lot of value post the listing. So for us, it's a race to the start. And I think fundamentally, we want to just make sure we get certain things right leading up to that, particularly if we think about the UK. I think 2 last closing statements would be, Paul from Thought Machine earlier on the stage said, go and build a great business, print profits, and the markets are going to reward companies for doing that. We spoke, pension funds want to invest in companies that are paying dividends. That makes perfect sense. So how do you attract them? Go and do that. That's a great idea. But then finally, let's also make sure that policy and perception, particularly in this country, is solid. And that's why we formed this Unicorn Council. We have over 50 billion of market cap private businesses in this council, so that we can speak to policymakers and really just highlight some of the things we see that are starting to rattle a little at scale. How are we thinking about entrepreneurs relief? Why would we have reduced that tenfold? How are we thinking about EIS, and how does that attract people to late stage? How do we think about VAT and the millions that are going away from irrecoverable VAT? All of these problems we need to tweak and fix to fix policy, and then we have a big job to do on perception here in the UK, and how do we get people excited about high growth companies being listed in the UK, growing in the UK, and not just £1 billion of company, but 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 billion market cap companies. So we're excited to see where things are headed. The market's certainly thawing, and we remain optimistic. We think next year could be one of the best we've seen in a while.
Well, Phil, my granny always told me a rolling stone gathers no moss, and notwithstanding the green in the logo and the Zilch, we know you're a constant propulsion engine, so kudos to you, the team, for all you've built here. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Phil Belamant. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Nice.